name is JJ Asghar, and I'm a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud. We are going to be talking about migrating MONOLITH to cloud native and stumbling blocks you might not know about. Again, hi, JJ. I'm a developer advocate, and yes, I really do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com, or you can find me on Twitter at JJ Asghar. So this whole talk is basically a bunch of collections of things I've found working with clients who've moved from the monolithic app to microservices, and just things that they ran into that are just almost, for lack of a better term, consistent. If you're moving into this world, there's a lot more to it than most people talk about, and I want to kind of highlight some things. So if you start going down this path, you won't get hit or stumble on these things. So let's keep going. So let's talk about this company called AsgharLabs. Yes, it's a fake company. AsgharLabs is going to be the guys that I'm going to use for a bunch of different companies I've talked to. It's a multinational tech conglomerate that bought hard into the VM ecosystem. They bought a bunch of hypervisors, VMware, whatever you want to call it, and they make the ones and zeros better than any other company. But they noticed that we're falling behind, so they wanted to move into the cloud native ecosystem. But it's one of those things where they've figured out that everything works around VMs should work just inside of containers too. And this is their story of the things that they get hit. In all seriousness, it's just a way to kind of explain what's going on without me actually talking about specific company X or Y, to make sure everything's in the safe space. So let's talk about what AsgharLabs thought they needed to do. They started with this whole physical data center, or a co-location place. They had a bunch of ESXi experts or KVM experts, and they ran this VM ecosystem. They were like, well, we're running this VMs. We should be able to take the same process of the monolithic app and push it in the cloud native. Bare metal and VMs are the same as containers, right? Like, we should be able to just do what we did when we moved from physical containers or physical machines to VMs, from VMs to containers. And obviously, that's not the truth. So where I come into this conversation as an expert, or whatever you want to call me, is usually right as I've had a few successful migrations. So the different companies that I've talked to, again, AsgharLabs is the guys of all that. If they've either spent some money on making a couple apps that are working in a cloud native way, putting that in air quotes for you, or they're moving down the path, but it's not moving as quickly as they want to. They're wondering what's going on. They thought they had the time or the effort or the money to do it, but it's just not working as well as they want. So they're realizing they're doing something wrong. So I come in as a cloud native person, and I ask some simple but very tough questions to ask. And believe it or not, it allows these companies that I've talked to, or AsgharLabs, to be able to really question and understand if they're actually going down the right path here. So the very first question I ask whenever I start with any new company when I'm coming in as a cloud native expert is, who containerized your app? Seriously. Do we know who actually did it? Is it one team over in another BU that you have to run because it's a center of excellence over there? Is it the developers who've never actually ran a containerized app apart from on their laptop and don't understand the infrastructure that you're going to be using? Obviously, I work at IBM, so I'm going to be trying to talk about a couple of IBM products, but I completely understand there's EKS and AKS out there for Kubernetes, or the ability to run other software, and like with Nomad or whatever. But I tip my hat to that they offer different strengths and weaknesses, just like IBM products. But it's a really important question to ask, because if your operations team only knows one tool and knows how to use that tool, yes, you might have a containerized runtime. But if the developer has never actually used, or the developer team or that center of excellence team has containerized their app and then shipped it over to ops and never actually tested on anything relatively close to it other than just running in, Kubernetes on their laptop with the Kubernetes free Docker thing, it's going to be very different than running that on a cloud instance. And please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat. I am watching it over in the corner here. So also, when they containerize these things, or whoever containerized it, was there only just a couple status meetings, right? Like, I know AsgharLabs, these certain teams, there were 3 teams involved getting this app out the door to production. They had 6 months to get it working, and they only had 3 sync meetings once each month at the beginning of the month to see where they were. It just doesn't work, right? Like, who in their right mind decided that that was the correct path to go down? And it was questioned. And when I asked that and brought that out, I was like, of course you're having a hard time. You're not talking about what you need to work. You need to collaborate. So let's keep going. So the next simple question simply is, why did you containerize your app, right? I know one BU inside of the AsgharLabs conglomerate containerized their app because they were told to. Up on high, random executive was like, we are going cloud native, containerize all our apps. Well, that didn't work, right? Like, why did you decide to do this? Like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to go next gen? Are we trying to stay ahead of the curve? Like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. There's so many situations like that. I've actually seen this happen on a couple companies where a random executive at the company, or a CTO or CIO or whoever up there makes decisions, they wanted to stay ahead of the curve. They wanted to make sure that they didn't what's what I'm looking for, fall behind with the new generation coming out, because they saw Heroku at the time and they're like, okay, we need to go cloud native because all these people are going to be using cloud technologies and we're still stuck on physical hardware. Well, the challenge there is, if you're just moving for moving's sake to try to stay ahead of the curve, there's a lot more things there that you don't realize. So you have to ask why. Why did we sit down and containerize this app? The next question is where? Where are you going to deploy this app? Like, honestly, the spurs from the conversation of, did we have a choice in where we're going to be deploying our application? Like, are we going to be running it on OpenShift? Are we going to be running it on Kubernetes? Are we going to be running it on Nomad? For that matter, are we running it on AWS, IBM Cloud, DigitalOcean? Who knows? Is this all part of an ELA that we don't know about? Is this the best one for our company or our products? Or are we just forced to use this thing? There's so many little questions around that if you're moving straight from a monolithic app, where I'm just taking this as a blanket statement, you've probably running it in a VM or on physical hardware, probably inside of a data center. And then all of a sudden you spin up this cloud infrastructure to run this application. There's a lot of questions there. Like, I know the whole point of the reason why AWS does so well is because they have so many of the different services around it that you eventually start using Route 53 for DNS. You start using RDS for your backends. And then all of a sudden you start spending more and more money inside of AWS. But you need to ask, like, do we need any of this stuff? Is this worth it? So ask, where are we actually going to deploy or plan to deploy this containerized app? And then finally, what did we actually containerize? Like, take a moment and say, did we just come and, wrap a Docker container around an application and call it a day? This comes from the idea and the actual architecture I saw in AsgharLabs BU, where they just took a WAR file, just so you know, the Java WAR file, or it could have been an EAR, to be honest with you, I don't really remember. And they threw it in the Java Docker container, the upstream standard one, from Java latest or whatever it was. It was something ridiculously insecure and not smart. And they threw that WAR file in there and they called it a day. They're like, hey, we successfully containerized our Java application. This opened up so many questions and so just why? Like, what did we do? This doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to reference this one a little bit later because genuinely speaking, this happens a lot more. But let's just take a quick aside and talk about some of the architectural changes that would happen if you start going down this path. The first one I want to talk about is just replatforming. Yes, I'm an IBMer, so of course I'm going to be showing WebSphere over in the corner, but put that in as whatever application stack you like to choose. So this is a really basic example, and honestly, this is exactly what happened with that one company, where they took a legacy Java application and they just put it into the, in this case, Liberty container and shoved it on to OpenShift. And they're like, haha, we're done. This is great. So they took their main platform and just shoved it into containerization. There were so many things there that they didn't realize. Like if you notice that middleware stack right there with the DB2 and the messaging queue there, because they shoved it into a container, all of a sudden it was harder to talk because you had to expose different ports, and they didn't take advantage of Kubernetes. June Thomas, would it be possible to list down a set of criteria on why a monolith should or could be dissolved into said microservice? I mean, is a checklist of some kind, or would that even be possible? That's a great question. You know, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. So I'm going to go through a couple of those during this talk. But as every engineer ever says, it depends, right? Like you don't really have a really good answer for it, and it really depends on the situation that you talk about. So hopefully I'll hit a couple of the things that I believe you should do or you should look at, and then kind of move forward from there. And if I didn't, please follow up with me after, and I'd love to have a deeper conversation about this. So going back to the replatform. So again, this is not what we need to do, right? Like this is a baby step, if anything, but it is somewhere people just go to and they stop. And I'm trying to convince you that there's more to this. So the next step, obviously, is repackaging into microservices, just like Thomas said a moment ago. So this is a natural progression from replatforming, right? Like you've taken the step and you're moving towards starting to break up your application. You have multiple WARs. You start leveraging things. This is good. I'm not going to lie. This is a lot better. But still the challenge is that there's more to it, and I'm going to get a little bit deeper into that in just a minute. But this is a middle, no pun intended, a middleware step. No. Oh, okay, fine. I thought that was funny. But it's kind of a middle step. Nice. Thank you, everybody. So the way where you want to go, and then what I'm hopefully going to teach through this presentation is you want to refactor and you want to move to a strangle pattern. So wait a second. Give me just a second there. Did I just tell you you need to refactor your code? Yes, absolutely. Because the way it worked in your monolithic app is not how it's going to work inside of your Kubernetes or OpenShift or your cloud native platform. And if you didn't know what the strangle pattern is, it's the concept of slowly but surely shaving off different services into their own microservices. I use the really bad example of printed receipts and scanning them. So during the year as a business, you probably sell quite a few things. You may give out a printed receipt with every single one. Well, in the United States, we have something called Black Friday, and then the Return Monday. So obviously, that service isn't probably going to be running all year round. Well, if it just spins up during the Monday, you have an opportunity to start playing with it and be able to understand it. And you can always run the service in parallel with it. I know it's a very bad example. I'm still working on that metaphor, but hopefully one day you can kind of understand it. Strangle pattern is the way to go. So where are the architectural advantages and disadvantages of moving into the cloud native ecosystem? Well, first of all, the major advantage is velocity and the ability to focus on their own scope of the different services. You can actually use your clusters also for what you actually need. Instead of one big pod where you take your monolithic app and dump it onto a cluster, which, by the way, I've seen a few ways too. But as you go down this path, there are some major disadvantages. And I'm just going to talk about those couple just because I'm going to keep going, obviously. Is it requires a higher level of cooperation. And you need more advanced integration tests, along with most likely a different deployment system. Uploading your WAR file into Tomcat and calling it a day as a deployment isn't going to be the same way you do it inside of Cloud Native. So it's really important to realize that there's a balance sheet here. You get some really great advantages, but you're going to have some real cultural changes in different situations here. So wait, I probably have this one person in the enterprise right now in this talk saying, wait, you're trying to get rid of my CCB, JJ. What the hell, man? That's not cool. Well, believe it or not, you've probably built your operations and production teams around getting things through the CCB. If you've ever read the Phoenix project, CCB is Change Control Board. It's an acronym for Change Control Board. The Phoenix project has a great scene in it by Gene Kim, where this new CTO comes into this company and he finds out they have this change control board that every single major manager of all the different teams have to give a thumbs up in the physical meeting for them to make a change to their production environment. So in certain companies, I've seen some AsgharLab use this to their advantage, where it slowed down changes to production. It mitigated risk. But in the cloud native ecosystem, you can't have a CCB. Like, you just can't. You might be deploying 5, 10, God forbid, 50 times a day for your little microservices. And there's no way you can take your managers and put them around a conference, well, especially in COVID live, but you can't put them in a room giving you a thumbs up to say yes and no. So it really is true. You got to realize that cultural changes really need to change. And if you lean on that CCB, I'm looking at you, middle managers, your cloud native is going to be a direct conflict with that. So are we doubling up on things? I'm going to speed up just a little bit to make sure that I have some time for questions at the end. And I apologize, I get kind of rambly. Yes, so there's a huge chance you will end up doubling up on technologies. You'll need to verify and audit that you aren't actually doubling up things. One of my best examples is this Java container that they were talking about had a scheduler built inside of it that would spin out smaller jobs like crons or whatever, and they did it all in Java. And I asked the question, like, you realize the way you've architected this by shoving this all into one container, you're basically spinning up a bunch of microservices inside of that pod. In essence, you're faking virtualization. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that wasn't I was hoping you'd be like, huh, that's weird. No, you were like, yes, that's how it is. And you realize you can't spread pods across a cluster, right? So all these pods, this one pod is sitting on one node of your 3-node, really expensive Kubernetes cluster. And that's the reason why you can't scale. It's because it's just one pod. And they're like, oh, we didn't get that. I thought we thought it would do other stuff. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works at all. So I asked them to go revisit the schedule conversation. And yes, there were some hard conversations back and forth because, I'm asking them to refactor their code. But eventually they were able to spin out a couple of services and leveraged the microservices to let Kubernetes start doing the scheduling for them. So they called out to say, hey, we need to spin up this microservice to go here. And they started level setting all of their major app across the whole cluster and let Kubernetes do the work that they needed to do. It was great. So isn't automation good here? And why are things so complicated now? Well, of course, automation is good here. And we could talk about the automation around using cloud native as its own talk, literally. But I just wanted to mention that, yes, you will be leveraging to automation very quickly. And you want to take the human element out of a lot of the things because you want the bots to do the work for you. And then also, you're probably asking, why are things so complicated now? And I want to flip that on you and say, it's probably always been this complicated, but because you're breaking things out as microservices, now you actually have visibility into it. And now you can focus on the bottlenecks and where the optimizations can be. And you'd be amazed on what information you get out by breaking up that massive monolithic app that you have to these microservices. A good friend of mine said it best. You originally had one ordinary bull mastiff, and now you have 13 yipping chihuahuas. It's a great statement. It really does put a thing around an anchor of breaking your monolithic app into a bunch of chihuahuas here. Of course, they're all going to be different states, and you're going to have to take care of them all. But it's a really good, it's a good anchor thought to explain all the effort and all the things that are revolved around. Instead of having one big dog that does all the work, now you have a bunch of small dogs that you have to feed, take care of, take for walks, et cetera, et cetera. Rob really bottle up that statement. Great for me. And to take it one more step farther, another good friend of mine, Ken here, he really did say, or he didn't say this, he stole this from someone else and I stole it from him. We replaced our monolith with microservices, so every outage is now a murder mystery. And that's very true, right? You are going to have to learn to be detectives because you're not going to have one massive log file. You're going to have to find a way to standardize on those logs to push them out somewhere. And there's this whole world around it that you've got to really own and work together. And hopefully one of the things you come out of here with is that if you're moving to cloud native, you're going to have another layer, you're going to have like huge layer of cooperation between teams. So here are some questions that you should ask to make sure about the cultural shift. I mentioned that CCB earlier, the Change Control Board. And if nobody shows up to that and nobody uses it, that's fine. But at the same time, if it's something you've done for a long time, you need to start working towards self-orchestration and you mitigate risk by using the 4I principle and things like that. You build that pipeline. You leverage that technology around it to do the work you need to. I mean, a pipeline for cloud native can be its own talk too, but I wanted to make sure that was mentioned. You truly have to learn to collaborate with other teams. Jira tickets aren't going to work as well as they used to. Like you can't just throw requests over one. You're going to have to sit down and really work together. And that's really important. Collaboration isn't just status meetings or stand-ups or scrum meetings or whatever. You're going to have to probably sit down with those people and work together and decide how to build out those different portions of the microservices to be successful. You're going to need some visibility and monitoring. Absolutely. You're going to need to see where things break and situations happen down those lines. You're going to need not only visibility, but observability, because you're going to have to be able to pinpoint when things go wrong. And Dragon, yes, you're absolutely right. A bull mastiff using the strangler pattern will get you X number of chihuahuas. It's exactly right. So you're going to have to play around and learn how to monitor your application. Ask real good, hard questions. I'm speeding up because I know I want to make sure there's some time left here. So how do the economics differ? I mean, we need to respect our CFOs. They control our coin purses. And with using things inside from the cloud to the data center, they've already probably understood the difference between CapEx and OpEx. You probably spent a ton of money spinning up your co-location application to run your application, and now you're moving to the cloud. Well, on top of that too, if you move into cloud native and you start using Kubernetes or OpenShift, there's opportunities for you to leverage those clusters in other ways. Using namespaces, for instance, you can leverage dev, QA, and prod all on the same cluster in a safe environment. So you don't need to have Jane Doe's desk over there who has a random desktop that we run our staging environment on anymore. Now you can actually test the real stuff on the real cluster. I mean, yes, of course, you're going to need some guardrails there, but you can. And that's actually makes your CFO happier because then they can see where the spend is actually all in one place. So what do you mean all our support is now on Stack Overflow? Well, unfortunately, it's kind of true. The cloud native ecosystem, yes, there are offerings like Red Hat OpenShift where you can buy the license from OpenShift or from Red Hat and be able to get support that way. But when something really goes wrong, if you are running your own cluster inside your data center or your own Nomad or if you've whatever, you're going to have to work with a community. And those things are really, really important. So some tangible things you need to think about is you need to have the large conversation on why you need to do this. Like, is this really worth the path you need to go down? If you have an application that's already in the black and making you money, and your CFO or your CTO or CIO tells you need to containerize that, you need to ask why. Because you're going to lose money and time and effort moving into containerization. You need to spend quite a bit of time moving into cloud native. And there's some things you need to work around. What's the best value for your customers? Taking your app down in a broken way or just letting it run and maybe start a new application, right? Like you're probably going to need to write a new application to do something. Make that in the cloud native way. Don't take down something making for the money. So I want to end here with this last this nice little statement that Thomas Cade, another friend of mine, told me, which was, you wouldn't use a saw when you needed a hammer, or a hammer when you needed a saw, right? Just take a moment and think about that in your head. I mean, both of them can do each other's jobs. You can use a hammer when you needed to saw a piece of wood by just hitting it until it breaks, or you can use a saw on the flat part and try to hammer in a nail. But you should use the right tool for the right job. And hopefully I got that across in this conversation. So thank you. And again, I'm so sorry. I thought I was going to hit the 25-minute mark to answer some questions. But if you have any other questions or I would love to talk about this more, please hit me up on Twitter at JJAsghar or awesome@ibm.com. My job is literally to be a resource for the public, to be just a helpful nerd. So please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have actually 2 more minutes. If we have a few questions, I think we might have time for at least one of them. We got 2 questions in the end. One was, how does this apply to Windows containers, which feel like a mix of Linux containers and Windows VMs, big and less often deployed?
Yes, the wonderful Windows conversation. Frankly speaking, I have seen a couple of companies move to containerized Windows applications with very, frankly speaking, basic .NET applications. Yes, it is production ready. Yes, Windows containers do exist in the world, but unfortunately, still the same rules apply. Like, do you actually need to containerize the work? Do you need to spend down that path? So you can still take the framework of asking these questions and make sure that things are successful. Technology is easy. It's the people that's the hard part.